So I am very excited to introduce everyone to Sahil Bhatia, who will be discussing STEM beyond sight, making STEM accessible for the visually impaired. So Sahil, thank you so much for being here. It's so great to see you again.
Hi, Anna. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Whenever you're ready, feel free to go ahead and get started.
Awesome. All right. Just give me a second. I'll pull up my presentation and then we can get started. I hope you guys can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
All right. So hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or evening from wherever you're joining us from the world. Thank you for all being here. And my name is Sahil Bhatia. My pronouns are he, him. I am an Indian male with shoulder-length brown, black hair. I have a pair of glasses. I'm a person with a beard, and I'm wearing a yellow shirt, sitting in front of a virtual background, which is having a view of the Earth from orbit. To talk a bit about myself, I'm an aerospace engineer and a polymath. And in my free time, I like to brew coffee, do astrophotography. I run, hike, and I occasionally try to learn some new languages. So today, my talk will be on STEM beyond sight, making STEM accessible for the visually impaired. And I'd like to thank Anna for kind of encouraging me to give this talk. I myself am a spectacle user on the higher end of the myopia spectrum. And I also have a red-green color blindness. So I was kind of encouraged by Anna to come here and share my story, but I felt more inclined to share some of the activities and challenges that have been happening in the community in India with regards to making STEM more accessible for the visually impaired. So let's get started with my talk. So just to give you an idea, according to the latest census of 2011, we have about 26 million disabled people, close to 27 million disabled people in India. And of those, 5 million of them are having some sort of visual impairment. And 1.1 million of them are between the ages of 5 to 19, which means they are going to school, going to university, and are in the education system. Now, in India, we have a peculiar case where almost more than half of these, about 3.5 million of them, are in rural areas, and 1.5 million of them are from urban areas. So why is there a lack of access to STEM in India? Well, similar to how there's a lot of problems in accessibility in STEM across the world, India also has a few unique challenges. First of all, our education system, the way it's developed and set up, has caused sort of a mentality or a false myth that it is not possible for students to be in STEM if they have any kind of blindness or low vision or vision disabilities. I shall discuss this further in my presentation, like where has this myth come up from? Two is linguistic barriers. Though we are a very diverse nation, we have 22 official languages and 1,600 other recognized languages and dialects. So for students who are from different backgrounds, who do not speak English or Hindi, or majorly in the speak in the regional languages, getting access to material to them becomes a challenge. And due to this, they are also held back. Thirdly, like I mentioned, there's a large divide between the urban and rural sectors, between income and obviously between the population disparity. As you must have heard, 3.5 million visually impaired people live in rural areas in India. And this is the 2011 statistic. So now this number definitely has changed. And fourth would be hardware costs and lack of skilled educators to cope with people to give them the education that they require in the methods that they can best learn from. So how did this myth of STEM is not for visually impaired people in India come up from? Well, owing that we had a British colonization history and most of our education system came from there, the education system in India is designed particularly more towards a traditional classroom setup. So let's say for teaching mathematics, the teacher will go up and write long equations on a board, and students will sit down and copy it. Or if you talk about a science lab, maybe it's looking at a microscope or looking at color changes in a chemical reaction, and which is not a very friendly way of learning for people who have visual impairments. This kind of also sets up how the education system is designed, where students are evaluated on their metric of, if task X is given, can you derive conclusion Y? And usually conclusion Y is geared towards people who have some sort of vision, or they are able to, they're not visually impaired. This then leads to pressure from societal, economic, and familial systems, because students are not encouraged to go towards STEM because of all of these reasons. Society and the way the family backgrounds are set up, STEM is not a very viable career option for them. It becomes very challenging because most of these people come from low-income backgrounds. So it is important for them to get a job early on. And this is a case for all of the low-income backgrounds in India, but it's especially hard with low vision or visually impaired students, because now they're forced to switch to streams alternative than STEM, and they do not get to study those subjects that they love. I will be highlighting a few cases later on in the presentation, which leads to the third stage, which I kind of discussed. When you don't pick STEM subjects, you are not going to be able to progress further in the education system with regards to STEM subjects. Universities and engineering programs, for example, which do not allow you to sit for their entrance exams just because you haven't studied those particular subjects. And hence we arrive at stage 4, which is propagation of the myths that STEM is not for visually impaired people. They usually go out to get jobs in other sectors where obviously they are underemployed, and definitely employment is much harder already as it is for them. So let's say students who still persevere and get into STEM, what are the challenges for them? And some of them I have also experienced as someone with some degree of visual impairment. Access to reading scientific papers and journals. Already we know that scientific journals and papers are already kind of behind closed doors, and there's a lack of open accessibility, but there's a further barrier for visually impaired students because they do not have the ability to comprehend those materials either through Braille or OCR or text-to-speech. These kind of hardware are not widespread in India, especially in STEM centers. Second is writing your research articles. Well, because STEM includes a lot of long equations and complex symbols, we do not have, a lot of times we do not have the hardware to make sure that visually impaired students can write those equations or numbers down in a research format. Third would be accessing diagrams. Well, a lot of work is being done world over to make sure that scientific journals and data and graphs can be more visually accessible. But again, in India, this is one of the major struggles, even down at the school level. Fourth, like I mentioned, participation in labs. I think the best part of from a person who has visual ability is when you experience or do a scientific experiment is the visual process. But because the way our labs are set up, they do not friendly enough for experiencing scientific experiments in a different way than sight. It also leads to a lot of discouragement. So visually impaired students are only left with very few tasks, like recording observations, and interpreting results also becomes quite difficult for them. And the fifth one is developing a conceptual ability and like doing scratch work. So let's say you're an engineer, but and you want to come up with a new design. What do? We bust out a pen and paper and we usually do some hand calculations. But again, because of lack of hardware and lack of software capable for visually impaired students, this becomes a major challenge to even get in the scratch phase and develop a conceptual ability. So this is these are the 5 major challenges that are there for STEM researchers who are visually impaired in India. So how can we change this? So firstly, we need to raise awareness and shift away from this restrictive mentality that we have developed in our country and or the world over, that students who are in STEM and are not visually impaired cannot be in this field. Second would be addressing the lack of resources, trainings for educators, and enabling teachers and facilitators to provide for and cater to people with disability, because it might not just be visual disability. Someone may have visual and auditorial disabilities which prevent them from learning in other ways that and thirdly would be to develop cheaper and more accessible learning materials. Again, India struggles a lot with the rural sector because there is a lack of accessibility. In fact, there was a statistic that one page of scientific material for a 10th grade book cost per page $4 to produce and manufacture, which is definitely not accessible for rural areas in India. And fourth would be having more disabled role models in STEM. I think this would be the area of biggest impact, because if people can look up to, if the visually impaired community can look up to someone who is in STEM and doing this job, I think there's a lot of hope. And again, it goes back to raising awareness and shifting away from this restrictive mentality. So let me just highlight some of the organizations that have been doing an amazing job in India with regards to providing accessibility. So Karthik Swani, he's the co-founder of iSTEM, and actually is a very inspirational person. I highly encourage you to look him up and see his journey. So like I said earlier, he was denied to sit in these engineering entrance exams 3 years in a row. And after that, he started applying abroad and got into Stanford, where he studied his bachelor's and master's in computer science, and came back and started this organization called iSTEM in India, which is an organization which is using math and science, enabling math and science education for people with low vision. On the right-hand side of the screen is a photo of Karthik Swani himself, and on the left-hand side is a photo of Karthik Swani and some educators he's discussing with. Next would be Vision Empower, again started by Vidya, who is a blind woman from Bangalore, and she also faced many of these struggles that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. If you go and read her story or her TED Talk, you would see that she was denied from studying science and math in her 11th and 12th grade, which did not allow her to pursue further higher education in STEM. She went on to go and set up Vision Empower, which is which is enabling visually impaired students across Karnataka to access materials of science and mathematics through various books, games, and innovative concepts. And it's a very cool kind of way that they make STEM accessible for these kids. And thirdly is the Xavier's Resource Center for the Visually Challenged. I would highly recommend anyone in India or even abroad to look them up, because they have some great research and great material on how we can make STEM more accessible for the visually impaired or the visually challenged. They provide a lot of training course materials for educators and teachers, so that they are better equipped to deal with and teach students who have visual impairments. And they host regular workshops, and actually I gained a lot of insight into the world of the visually impaired community in India through their work. So I'm very grateful for them to share their material with me. And lastly, what can you do? I think all of us over here in this conference have a part to play, can play a very important part. Like Anna said in her talk during the IAC in Dubai, accessibility cannot be an afterthought. And I think all of us have this responsibility to make sure that we can contribute something for someone. So I guess the first step for all of us would be to educate ourselves. How can we make ourselves more accessible and more friendly for our friends and our community who do not have the same privileges that we have? And these are quite simple things. They do not cost any money and they're quite effective. Second, if you're a professor or a student or a researcher, try to make your labs and research more accessible towards people with visual or other disabilities. An example that I read online was as simple as installing large monitors for microscopes so that people with high degree of visual impairment can still comprehend some of the results that are coming from observing through the microscope. And third point would be to actively think about how can we be more inclusive from the beginning. Now, this could kind of be in terms of engineering design or but we need to make sure that we're also doing this across policy as well. I think one of the reasons why the education in India has suffered so much is because we weren't thinking about this community at large from the beginning itself. And it's high time we change that. And not only India, across the world. And fourth, like I just said, Karthik and Vidya, I think all of us can be role models towards enabling and empowering the disabled community across the world in STEM. Well, this is it for my presentation. I'm open to any questions, and my contact details are over here. I'd be very happy to get in touch and see how I can help. And if I could point you towards some of the materials that I had used for this talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sahil. Thank you very much for being here with us today. We really appreciate it.